What if the world you think you see is not the world at all, but a quiet, shimmering reconstruction your mind paints for you moment by moment? What if every color, every shape, every sound, every memory is not a mirror of reality, but a soft interpretation, a dream of the brain, a personal universe rising and falling inside your awareness? And what if no two minds, anywhere, ever experience the same reality, even when looking at the same world? Hello and welcome to this gentle corner of exploration, where science leans into wonder and the universe feels close enough to touch. This channel is devoted to quiet journeys through physics, consciousness, perception, and the mysteries that hover just beneath the surface of everyday life. If you find these slow, unfurling ideas comforting, if the soft questioning of existence feels like home to you, I'd be grateful if you tapped like or subscribed, but only if you truly enjoy drifting with these kinds of topics. Now, let your attention settle. Let the edges of your day soften a little. There is no rush, only curiosity. Only the soft unfolding of a question that has waited for the right moment to meet you. Why is reality not the same for anyone? The answer is not simple, and it is not loud. It is a slow river of neuroscience, quantum possibility, and the fragile ways the mind builds the world you believe you inhabit. So we will move gently, thought by thought, breath by breath. The story begins not in your eyes or your ears or even your memories. It begins in the whisper of existence itself, a world made of light and atoms and vibrations that have no inherent color or sound or meaning. There is only information rippling endlessly, awaiting an observer, awaiting a mind capable of translating those ripples into something like a world. Imagine for a moment the space around you, the room, the air, the objects resting nearby. What you perceive feels solid, steady. The edges look sharp, the colors reliable. But the brain you carry is constructing all of that from fragments. Just fragments. Light enters the eye as waves with no color until your brain decides what hue to give them. Vibrations in the air have no sound until your brain assigns tone and texture. Even time itself does not arrive as a smooth ribbon. The brain stitches moments together, filling its gaps with confidence, smoothing the noise with stories it never tells you it is telling. You might imagine the brain as a camera, faithfully capturing the world. But the truth is closer to a painter, a dreamer, a soft interpreter of an infinite field of possibility. And that field of possibility is different for every person. As you listen, notice how the edges of your awareness shift, how your mind takes in these words and wraps them in your memories, your feelings, your private associations. The same sentence spoken to 1,000 people becomes 1,000 different meanings. The world outside is shared, perhaps, but the world within is uniquely yours. This is the secret at the heart of perception. Reality is not delivered, it is created. Let us take a slow step deeper. Inside your skull, billions of neurons communicate in silent electrical whispers. They fire in patterns, forming waves that drift like tides. These patterns are your perception. These waves are your world. But no two brains arrange these waves in the same way. Every mind has its own neural fingerprint, its own history, its own web of connections shaped by every moment it has ever lived. From this delicate architecture emerges a truth both humbling and beautiful. There is no single version of reality, only the version your brain constructs, and the version someone else constructs, and the version every creature constructs, each one shaped by its own structure of sensing and remembering and interpreting. The quantum field of awareness that underlies your experience is constantly selecting which possibilities to bring forward. But it does not simply choose based on raw sensory data. It chooses based on expectations, predictions, and personal history. The brain is not waiting to see the world. It is predicting the world before it arrives. This means perception is not passive. It is active, creative, dreamlike. And this dream does not unfold once. It unfolds continuously, moment after moment, at staggering speed, stitching together signals, memories, guesses, and ancient evolutionary shortcuts. Take the simple act of reaching for a cup on a table. Before your hand moves, your brain predicts the weight of the cup, the temperature it should have, how far your arm must travel, what the texture might feel like. If something surprises you the moment you touch it, the surprise is simply the difference between prediction and reality. You never notice the predictions. They happen in the quiet space beneath your thoughts. But they guide everything. They create a world before you ever see it. And because your predictions are shaped by your life, your body, your memories, your culture, your emotions, your past experiences, no one else will ever construct the same reality you do. Now, breathe softly as we wander deeper still. Consider color. We talk about it as if it is fixed: red, blue, green. But color is not a property of objects. It is a negotiation between wavelengths and the cells of your eye, and the interpretive rhythms of your cortex. Color does not exist out there. It exists in you. Two people will see slightly different shades even when looking at the same sunset. Their brains mix signals differently. Their retinal cells are arranged differently. Their memories of color influence their expectations, subtly shaping what they perceive. The world is stable only because we agree that it is stable. But no agreement can make two minds truly identical. Now think of sound. A vibration moves through the air. Your ear receives it. Your brain turns it into something you call a voice or a note or a whisper. But the sound does not exist as sound until your brain interprets it. A violin's tone is not truly a tone until consciousness renders it into experience. Your entire auditory world is a dream crafted from oscillations. Now, stretch this understanding to emotion. When you see a face, your brain fills in emotional meaning. A tightening of muscles might look like anger to one person, concentration to another. A glance might feel threatening to one, benign to another. Reality shifts according to who you are, not just what is there. Imagine two people walking through the same city street. One sees opportunity, light, hope. Another sees danger, noise, confusion. The difference is not the street, it is the nervous system interpreting it. This is why memories differ, why eyewitnesses disagree, why two people sitting in the same room may leave with entirely different impressions of the atmosphere. Each mind is a universe. Pause here and notice the gentle widening of this idea. Notice how your thoughts move slowly across its surface, how the concept opens like a subtle horizon, revealing that your reality is not a fixed, rigid thing but a soft construction, a wave arising in the quiet ocean of your awareness. From a neuroscientific perspective, perception is a prediction machine. But from a consciousness perspective, perception is a co-creation between your mind and the universe. It is the universe expressing itself through your senses, filtered through the story your brain has learned to tell. You are observing reality and being observed by it. Each glance, each sound, Each touch becomes an interplay between the outer world and the inner field of awareness where meaning emerges. And meaning is always personal. Now, let your mind drift a little as the pacing softens. Imagine awareness as a candle in a vast room. The light it casts reveals only some of what is there. Shadows flow behind the edges, and the room itself is far larger than your candle can ever illuminate. No candle is the same. No flame flickers in the same rhythm. Each person illuminates a different part of the room. This is why reality feels shared yet endlessly private. Let us move deeper into the stillness beneath perception. Inside your brain, neurons fire not only in response to the world, but in anticipation of it. Your brain spends far more time predicting than receiving. It is always ahead by a fraction of a moment, creating a soft, internal model of what it expects to find. This model is your reality. When sensory input arrives, the brain compares it to the model. If the input matches expectation, the brain does not bother updating much. It simply says, yes, this aligns with the world I anticipated. But when something does not match the prediction, reality sharpens. You notice. You pay attention. You adjust. This subtle dance between expectation and correction is how your mind stabilizes a world that is constantly shifting. This also explains why two people can witness the same event and walk away with different truths. Each observed the event through a different model, a different prediction of what reality should be. Their brains filtered different details, emphasized different signals, discarded different noise. Memory then grows from that personal perception, and over time, reinforces the belief that one's own experience was the objective one. But there is no objective perception, only objective information and subjective interpretation. As the mind drifts deeper into this realization, something begins to soften. The world feels less rigid and more fluid, more like a living process than a fixed structure. This fluidity can be frightening for some, but here, in this gentle unfolding, it becomes comforting. Because it means reality is not something done to you, but something you participate in. You are not a passive observer. You are a co-creator. You are a wave in the quantum field of awareness, shaping and shaped by everything you perceive. Slowly now, let the story stretch forward like a quiet horizon. Imagine waking each morning not into the world, but into your interpretation of it. Imagine colors rising in your mind like dawn light, sounds knitting themselves into meaning, faces gathering emotional contours your brain learned long ago. Reality meets you halfway. The universe presents itself as pure possibility. Your brain turns that possibility into the gentle structure of your life. This is why the same moment can feel entirely different on different days. Why a familiar place can suddenly look new after a long absence. Why people you love sometimes feel distant, and strangers sometimes feel familiar. Perception is not stable. It is a breathing phenomenon. And within this breathing lies the quiet truth at the heart of our question. Reality isn't the same for anyone because each of us is a unique pattern of predictions, memories, sensitivities, and neural rhythms. We do not see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. As you let this idea settle into the soft space between thoughts, you might feel a gentle spaciousness opening inside you. A sense that the world is less rigid than you once imagined, and more like a field of infinite potential, rising and folding in your awareness with each passing moment. This is the whisper of existence, the soft realization that the universe is not merely out there, but unfolding within you. And so we continue, moving deeper into the quiet architecture of perception, where reality softens into something more fluid, more personal, more intricately shaped by the silent work of the mind. Let a question rise gently in you now, almost on its own. If the world you experience is built inside your brain, what exactly is being built? And how far does this inner construction reach into the fabric of what you call real? The further we go, the more you may notice the subtle relaxation that comes from understanding how the mind shapes the world. There is a comfort in knowing that perception is not a rigid truth, but a soft, shifting interpretation. It means you are not trapped in a fixed universe. You are participating in an unfolding. As we settle into this next layer, imagine the brain as a quiet observatory, not fixed on the outside world, but positioned at a threshold where signals from the external universe meet the private landscapes of memory, prediction, and meaning. Every sensation is filtered through this meeting point. Every experience becomes a blending of what the world offers and what the mind expects. The neuroscience of perception reveals that what you perceive is not the raw world, but a controlled hallucination, stabilized by incoming data. Not a hallucination in the sense of inaccuracy, but in the sense of construction. The brain is constantly generating its best guess about reality and updating it only when the external world contradicts those predictions strongly enough to demand revision. This idea has been shaped by decades of research in predictive processing, a field that suggests the brain is always anticipating what should be there. The outer world is not the primary input. It is the correction signal. Imagine walking down a familiar hallway. Your brain doesn't wait to perceive the walls or the floor or the objects you expect to pass. It predicts them, fills them in, and only checks occasionally to ensure nothing is wildly different from expectation. That is why you can navigate familiar environments with ease, even while distracted. Your brain has already constructed the world ahead of you based on your memories of it. This prediction-first approach is not a flaw. It is the reason perception feels seamless. If the brain relied solely on raw sensory input, your experience would lag behind reality by fractions of a second, creating a continuous sense of delay. Instead, the brain stays ahead. It builds the world before you enter it, and every brain builds a slightly different version. This is why two people witnessing the same event rarely walk away with identical recollections. Their brains predict differently. They emphasize different details. They filter different pieces of information based on their personal histories, emotional states, and cultural backgrounds. Even the tiniest differences matter. A subtle shift in mood can alter perception noticeably. When calm, the world may feel gentle, open, almost brighter in its stillness. When anxious, the same environment may feel constricting, noisy, filled with signals that feel sharper, more threatening. The environment hasn't changed. The predictive model has. Slowly now, let your awareness stretch over the idea that your perception at any given moment is shaped not just by what you sense, but by everything that has ever shaped you. Your earliest memories, your experiences, the meaning you've assigned to gestures, tones, expressions, and places. All of these form the scaffolding of your internal model of the world. And this model is not static. It adjusts continuously, often, without your awareness. The brain updates its predictions whenever it encounters a discrepancy big enough to matter, a prediction error. This is why new experiences feel sharper and more vivid than familiar ones. The brain pays attention when it must revise itself. Imagine the first time you visited a new place. The details felt pronounced. The colors, textures, sounds, the patterns of movement, all vivid. Your brain was updating its internal model with fresh information. But after repeated visits, the vividness fades, replaced by familiarity. The brain no longer needs to devote energy to active interpretation. It predicts the world instead. This reveals something subtle and profound. When the brain predicts well, reality becomes quieter, smoother, more background. When the brain predicts poorly, reality becomes vivid, surprising, sometimes overwhelming. And because each brain predicts differently, each world feels different. Let us drift deeper into the space beneath conscious awareness, where the brain does most of its work. There are vast networks in your mind that process information long before it reaches your conscious experience. These networks decode signals from the senses, compare them to memory, evaluate threat and safety, and shape emotional responses. Yet, most of this happens outside your conscious control. In this quiet, unseen region, the brain edits reality for you. It softens some details, intensifies others, blends the noise into something coherent. It decides which signals matter and which signals to ignore. You are not aware of this editing process, yet it defines everything you experience. Neuroscientists often describe perception as the brain reducing uncertainty. It wants a stable, predictable world. When signals are unclear or incomplete, the brain fills the gaps. This is why you can read a sentence with missing letters. Why you can recognize a familiar face even in dim light. Why you can hear meaning in a whisper mixed with noise. Your brain fills in what is not there. But what it fills in differs from mind to mind. In one person, uncertainty may trigger the expectation of safety. In another, uncertainty may feel threatening. Two people walking through the same dimly lit street may construct entirely different realities around them, shaped by their predictive patterns. Now imagine how this applies to memory. Memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. When you recall something, the brain rebuilds the experience from fragments stored across different regions. The context, the emotion, the sensory details, the meaning you made of the moment. The brain does not retrieve a perfect replica. It interprets the memory anew. This means memories shift over time, not because they are fading, but because each recollection updates them. The brain redreams the past each time you revisit it, blending the original experience with everything that has changed in you since then. And because each mind changes in its own way, each memory evolves into something uniquely personal. There is a softness to this process, a fluidity, as if the mind is less a container of truth and more a lens through which truth is refracted, colored, shaped. Now let the pace slow even further. Picture yourself standing in a vast field of awareness. All around you, sensory signals drift like gentle currents. Light, sound, touch, motion. The brain gathers these currents and weaves them into something coherent. But the weaving is different for each person, guided by hidden assumptions formed over a lifetime. You and another person may stand in the same room, breathe the same air, listen to the same quiet hum of existence, and yet inhabit distinct inner worlds. Not because of imagination, but because of the architecture of perception. Your brain is tuned not only by biology, but by experience, by trauma or safety, by culture, by language, by the cadence of childhood, by the patterns of attention you learned long before you knew what attention was. Language itself shapes perception. Some cultures have dozens of words for shades of blue. Others blur the distinction between green and blue entirely. Some languages emphasize spatial relationships. Others emphasize relational ones. These differences seep into perception, shaping how the world is felt long before words appear in the mind. The universe you perceive is, in part, shaped by how your brain has learned to describe it. Now drift deeper, as if sinking slowly into a still pond of awareness. Consider time. The passage of time feels continuous, yet the brain does not perceive time in an unbroken flow. Instead, it samples reality in discrete moments, like frames in a film. The stitching together of these frames creates the illusion of continuity. This means your sense of time is also constructed. Under stress, the brain increases its sampling rate, making moments feel longer and sharper. In calm states, the sampling slows, and time feels smooth and unhurried. Two people living the same hour may feel entirely different durations passing. Even time itself is personal. This brings us gently into the philosophical horizon where neuroscience meets the mystery of consciousness. If every perception is constructed, if time, color, emotion, and memory are shaped internally, what remains of objective reality? There is an external world. There are photons, vibrations, molecules, physical structures, energies. But what you experience is filtered through your nervous system, shaped by a lifetime of patterns, painted by a brain that seeks meaning in every ripple of existence. Reality is the meeting point between the outer world and the inner model your brain builds. And since every brain builds a different model, no two realities are ever the same. There is something deeply soothing in realizing this. It means the differences between people are not flaws or misunderstandings. They are the natural result of distinct nervous systems interpreting the infinite field of existence in their own ways. As this understanding settles into the quiet spaces of your mind, notice how gently it shifts perspective. The world feels less like a rigid structure and more like a breathing, shared dream, co-created by billions of minds, each generating its own unique interpretation. Reality begins to feel different once you understand that perception is not a direct window, but a soft construction your mind shapes from signals and expectation. As you ease more deeply into this, the edges between inner and outer begin to blur, not in confusion, but in a kind of gentle clarity. A recognition that what you call the world is a delicate merging of what enters your senses and what rises within your awareness. Let yourself imagine, for a moment, the space behind your eyes. Not as darkness, but as a quiet chamber where the information from the world arrives as faint echoes. Light waves transformed into tiny electrical ripples. Vibrations of air translated into patterns the brain learns to call sound. All of it drifting inward. All of it incomplete. All of it awaiting interpretation. In that chamber, the brain weaves meaning. It takes the soft raw ingredients of sensation and mixes them with memories stored across many regions at once. It lays predictions over the incoming signals, shaping them before they even reach your conscious mind. And so, the world you experience is not the world as it is, but the world as your brain decides it must be in order to make sense. Every moment, this process continues quietly, almost rhythmically. A gentle pulse of input and interpretation, input and interpretation. A slow breathing of experience. And because the inner landscape of every mind is different, shaped by different patterns of emotion, memory, and expectation, each person's experience becomes a unique expression of this universal process. You might imagine the brain as a sculptor working in a silent room. Outside the room, raw material waits. Inside, the sculptor shapes, smooths, removes excess, and adds subtle curves guided by instinct, training, and intuition. Even when presented with the same material, no two sculptors create the same form. Likewise, no two minds shape the same reality. When neuroscientists study perception, they often describe the brain as seeking coherence. It does not want noise. It does not want uncertainty. It wants the world to make sense, to be predictable enough to navigate safely, to be familiar enough to reduce fear, to be organized in ways that match the inner model you developed across a lifetime of experiences. And when the world does not match that model, the mind adjusts, not only its understanding of the world, but its internal expectations. A quiet refinement, a reshaping of the sculpture. Every surprise changes you. Every moment of wonder rewrites a pattern. Every confusion sharpens the mind to update its predictions just slightly, just enough. This continuous reshaping is why perception feels so alive. Why the world can look different after a long conversation. Why familiar places sometimes seem unfamiliar after time has passed. The world hasn't changed. The sculptor has. Let the pace slow now, as if the thoughts themselves are drifting in a wider space. Inside the visual system, signals from the eyes do not travel directly to a single place. They spread through a network of regions, each interpreting a different aspect. Motion, color, depth, edges, orientation. They converge and diverge, weaving elaborate maps. These maps are not photographs of the world. They are interpretations. They adjust based on attention, mood, context, and memory. Two people looking at the same scene receive the same photons, yet what those photons become inside the mind is never identical. The same is true for sound. If you and another person hear a subtle tone, one of you might experience nostalgia. Another may feel alertness. Another may feel nothing at all. The brain assigns meaning before you are aware of it, and that meaning shapes perception. Sound becomes emotion. Emotion becomes interpretation. Interpretation becomes reality. And beneath this, the flow of attention moves like a spotlight across the landscape of your experience. You notice only what the brain lets you notice. 1,000 details drift past at every moment, and the mind selects only a few. It chooses based on relevance, on prediction, on safety, on patterns that have repeated themselves so many times they've become invisible. You move through your days as if the world is stable, yet the truth is quieter. The world is too vast to perceive fully. Your mind chooses a small portion and makes that your world. The more softly you consider this, the more you begin to sense the gentle freedom it offers. If your experience is shaped internally, then the world is not an unchanging structure you must endure. It is a fluid meeting point between outer signals and inner creation. Let your attention drift now to the feeling of your body in space. The brain constructs this feeling too, combining signals from muscles, joints, skin, and the inner ear. Even the sense of where you are, the sense of motion, the sense of stillness, is built inside the mind. A quiet arrangement of internal signals, interpretable in many ways. Close your eyes in a dark room, and you may notice that your body fades in certain places, while other sensations become more present. This too is perception shaping reality. Without visual input, the brain redistributes its attention. the internal model adjusts. The reality of the body shifts. There is something soothing in this recognition, a reminder that the experience of self is as fluid as the experience of the world. In the quiet regions of the brain, where emotion and memory intertwine, perception becomes colored by past experience. A familiar scent carries years within it. A certain tone of voice activates pathways shaped long ago. Even simple gestures can feel welcoming or unsettling based on associations stored deep within neural networks. These associations differ for everyone. This is why two people can stand in the same place, hear the same words, and feel entirely different truths rising inside them. It is not misunderstanding. It is the natural variation of conscious beings interpreting the world through the architecture of their minds. Neuroscience reveals that the brain does not separate perception from meaning. They arise together, intertwined. The way you perceive the world is inseparable from what the world means to you. Meaning shapes perception just as perception shapes meaning. A quiet loop, a soft feedback between inner and outer. This loop is why new experiences can feel disorienting, why moments of revelation shift not only your thoughts, but your senses as well. When meaning changes, the world can seem to change with it. Let your awareness drift like a slow ripple through the understanding that every person lives inside a world shaped by these subtle, continuous processes. Not separate from the external world, but not identical to it either. A gentle intersection of what is out there and what is within. In this intersection, the universe becomes something intimate, not distant or unreachable, but woven into the rhythms of your mind. Every perception is the meeting of your consciousness and the vast field of existence. Every sensation is a point of contact between the cosmos and your inner world. As this thought quiets, you may feel the soft space beneath it. A sense that reality is not fixed, that your experience of it is a living, breathing process, always changing, always moving in gentle patterns shaped by awareness. And within this movement, there is a stillness, a quiet place where perception, meaning, memory, and sensation blend into something seamless. A gentle unfolding of experience that feels less like a structure and more like a flowing field, shifting softly as the mind shifts. The mind does not always tell you how it builds reality. It simply offers the finished experience. But knowing that the construction is ongoing allows you to sense the subtle artistry beneath every moment. The universe enters through your senses, but the world you inhabit arises in your consciousness. As the thoughts settle, let them fade like a slow wave returning into a wide ocean, leaving only the gentle awareness that perception is not a fixed truth, but an ever-changing expression of your inner and outer worlds, blending quietly in each moment. The deeper we move into the quiet architecture of perception, the more the world begins to feel like a soft mirage woven from signals and memories, shaped not by what is objectively there, but by what the mind has learned to expect. In the gentle unfolding of this idea, something begins to shift. Reality no longer appears like a fixed landscape, but like a living process, constantly updated, constantly interpreted, constantly recreated through the rhythms of awareness. Every sound you hear exists first as a vibration in the air, then as a signal carried through tiny bones and delicate hairs, and finally as a pattern of electrical waves shaped by the brain into something meaningful. Every color you see begins as wavelengths with no hue at all, until your mind transforms them into the richness of experience. Every texture, every scent, every movement is translated and interpreted. Even the feeling of having a body, the sense of where you are in space, is built internally from signals that must be assembled into a coherent whole. And within that whole, there are infinite variations, each shaped by the inner history of the observer. When you look at a familiar place, it may feel stable, predictable, almost effortless to perceive. But the ease comes not from the world being simple. It comes from the brain being practiced at constructing that particular world. Familiarity is just a sign that prediction is working well. When you enter a new place, everything feels sharper because your brain has no stored model to rely on. It must rebuild from the ground up, allowing every detail to stand out more clearly. The sense of newness is really a sense of uncertainty. The mind is gathering information to refine its predictions. In this way, perception is always a negotiation between what your brain expects and what your senses supply. The negotiation is ongoing and delicate, something you rarely notice because so much of it happens beneath the surface of consciousness. Yet this hidden process shapes everything you experience. Even the emotional tone of a moment can shift what the world looks and feels like. When you are anxious, the brain becomes vigilant, scanning for danger, pulling out any detail that could hint at threat. The same room, the same faces, the same sounds take on a different quality. Edges feel sharper. Movements feel faster. Shadows seem heavier. When you are calm, the brain relaxes its predictions. The world softens, feels more open, more spacious. This isn't imagination. It is the predictive machinery of the brain adjusting its interpretation of the environment based on internal state. Emotion, memory, and expectation blend into perception so seamlessly that you rarely notice they are part of the same process. The neuroscientific truth is gentle but far-reaching. You never perceive the world as it is. You perceive it as your brain organizes it. This extends into the flow of time as well. Time does not arrive in consciousness as a smooth continuum. Instead, the brain collects discrete moments and stitches them into a seamless experience. When you are deeply absorbed, the stitching speeds up and hours may pass unnoticed. When you are bored or uneasy, the stitching slows and minutes stretch out. Time expands and contracts according to the inner rhythms of attention and emotion. Two people standing side by side in the same moment are living through different durations, each one shaped by their internal sampling of experience. What we call the present is not a universal now, but an individually constructed window, shaped by how quickly the brain processes information and how much prediction it can rely on. The more predictable the world feels, the narrower and smoother the window. The more uncertain it feels, the wider and more jagged the window becomes. Meaning blends into this as well. When something matters to you, the brain prioritizes it, amplifies it, weaves it more tightly into your model of reality. When something feels irrelevant, the brain lets it fade. This is why you can be surrounded by countless sounds and yet notice only a voice calling your name. It is why you can look at a crowded scene and immediately pick out the person you care about, even from a distance. Meaning shapes perception by guiding attention, and attention shapes perception by altering predictions. Nothing enters your awareness unfiltered. Every sensation is touched by memory, emotion, meaning, context, and expectation before it becomes experience. Even the sense of self, the quiet feeling of being the one who perceives, is composed of signals passing through networks distributed throughout the brain. These networks build a model of who you are, where your body ends, what belongs to you, what feels familiar, what feels foreign. This self-model is as fluid as any other part of perception. When you lose yourself in a moment, the model fades. When you feel self-conscious, the model tightens. When you are tired, it softens at the edges. When you are deeply focused, it sharpens. The boundaries of the self shift constantly, yet you experience it as stable because the brain prefers the illusion of a consistent center. Beneath that illusion lies a quiet truth. The self you experience is another form of perception, another construction. And, like all constructions, it is shaped by the personal history of the observer. As we drift deeper, consider how language itself influences perception. A person raised speaking a language with many words for shades of snow perceives those shades more distinctly. A language that categorizes space differently shapes how its speakers perceive distance and direction. A language that emphasizes emotions differently shapes how its speakers interpret facial expressions. Language becomes part of the predictive model. It shapes how the mind divides experience into categories, and those categories influence what details the brain notices or ignores. Two people may look at the same scene but carve it into meaning in entirely different ways, simply because their languages guide attention differently. Slowly, you begin to sense the vastness of variation in perception. Not as chaos, but as a gentle multiplicity of worlds coexisting within the same physical space. Every mind walking beside you carries its own quiet universe of interpretation, shaped by patterns you will never fully know. This realization softens the edges of judgment. When someone reacts differently to the same moment, they are not being unreasonable. They are perceiving a different construction of reality. When someone remembers something differently, they are not being forgetful. They are reconstructing the memory through a different emotional and predictive lens. When someone seems distant or overwhelmed or uncertain, they are navigating a model of the world that may be filled with signals and associations unique to their history. Perception is personal. Reality is shared only in broad strokes. The textures, meanings, tones, and emotional contours are unique to each consciousness. And as you settle into that understanding, a quiet spaciousness begins to open. The world feels softer, not because it has changed, but because your perception of perception has deepened. You notice how easily the mind can misinterpret a gesture, how memory can shift with time, how emotion colors everything without announcing itself, how attention filters the world in ways you will never fully detect. This awareness creates a gentle humility, a kind of spacious compassion for yourself and others. It becomes easier to sit with different interpretations, easier to understand that minds construct reality based on what they have been shaped by, easier to see how each person moves through a world that feels as real to them as yours does to you. In the stillness that forms around this understanding, the boundaries between inner and outer begin to feel less rigid. The universe out there and the universe within your awareness blend into a single field of experience, shaped by perception and prediction, sensation and memory, emotion and meaning. The mind becomes less of an observer and more of a participant, co-creating reality in every moment through the dance of signals and interpretation. And as this thought drifts into the background, it leaves behind a subtle recognition that the world you perceive is never the whole world. It is a softly unfolding version of it, shaped by the unique rhythms of your consciousness. The brain's construction of reality extends even deeper than the senses, deeper than the shaping of time, deeper than memory's quiet revisions. Beneath all of these lies a subtler layer, a foundation of interpretation so automatic and so constant that it often goes unnoticed entirely. The brain's instinctive search for patterns. Every sight, every sound, every subtle shift in the environment is filtered through this ancient need to find structure in the seeming randomness of the world. Patterns make the unpredictable feel manageable. They allow the brain to reduce the overwhelming complexity of existence into something familiar enough to navigate. But the patterns the brain notices first are not universal. They are shaped by culture, personality, emotion, and individual history. One person may look at a clouded sky and see calmness, while another sees tension. One hears a distant sound and assumes safety. Another assumes threat. The difference lies not in the world, but in the mind's habitual patterns of interpretation. These patterns, once formed, influence perception as strongly as the senses themselves. They guide attention, telling the brain what to notice and what to ignore. They shape assumptions about others, about events, about oneself. Most importantly, they create consistency in a world that is anything but consistent. The brain takes comfort in familiarity, even if that familiarity is imperfect. This is why people often cling to stories about themselves or others long after new information has emerged. The old pattern feels more predictable, more stable. Updating the model requires effort, and the brain is economical in its energy use. It prefers to maintain what it already believes unless forced otherwise. This subtle preference shapes perception in profound ways. When you expect kindness, you tend to notice it more easily. When you expect hostility, you interpret neutral expressions as sharper, colder. When you expect failure, even small obstacles feel like confirmation. When you expect success, setbacks feel temporary. These shifts are not conscious. They are woven into the predictive fabric of the mind. The brain sees what it is prepared to see. And because everyone has different histories, expectations, and learned patterns, the world appears different for each individual. This is why shared experiences fracture into countless private ones. Why two people can walk away from the same conversation feeling entirely different emotions. Why one person feels seen and another feels overlooked. Why a gesture that feels warm to one feels ambiguous to another. The brain fills the space between moments with its own expectations, sculpting experiences that feel unquestionably real. Yet, beneath the certainty lies a delicate balance between what enters the senses and what rises from within. Sensory information arriving from the world is often incomplete, too limited to offer the full truth of a moment. The brain fills the gaps with predictions drawn from memory. These predictions feel so natural that you rarely notice where reality ends and expectation begins. This blending becomes clearest in the moments when the brain's predictions falter. A shadow mistaken for a person. A sound interpreted as familiar when it is not. A memory felt as true that later reveals its distortion. When predictions fail, the illusion becomes visible for a moment. These disruptions are not errors, but glimpses into the mind's quiet machinery. They reveal how much of perception is constructed. The mind is not deceiving you. It is doing its best to build meaning from limited signals. As we drift deeper into the inner landscape of perception, the distinction between sensing and interpreting becomes even more subtle. Even at the level of raw sensory data, the brain alters what arrives. Vision, for example, is not a direct reflection of light. The brain enhances edges, fills in blind spots, and adjusts colors based on context. It continuously edits the visual world to create stability. Without these edits, the world would appear chaotic, always shifting, never settling into recognizable shapes. Sound experiences similar adjustments. Background noise is filtered out automatically. The brain enhances certain frequencies while suppressing others, shaping an auditory environment that feels coherent. Touch is interpreted through layers of context and expectation. A gentle contact can feel comforting or alarming depending on the predictive state of the mind. Even taste is shaped by more than the tongue. Anticipation alone can change the entire experience of flavor. All of these adjustments merge into the seamless illusion of reality. Not false, not imagined, simply constructed. The world you experience is not a raw reflection but a refined creation, sculpted inside your awareness with astonishing speed and sophistication. This construction extends inward as well. The perception of your own thoughts, your emotions, your sense of identity is subject to the same predictive processes as the outer world. A thought arises, and the brain immediately interprets it. An emotion flickers, and the brain assigns meaning. The sense of self shifts moment by moment, shaped by patterns the mind reinforces again and again. The inner world is as fluid as the outer, though it is often mistaken for stable. But when you look closely, even your thoughts reveal their changing nature. They move like waves across the surface of awareness, appearing, fading, returning in new forms. The self you perceive in one moment is not the same as the self in the next. Beneath the illusion of continuity lies a quiet flow of experience, stitched together so smoothly that its changes often go unnoticed. As the mind continues to drift through these layers, perception begins to feel less like a fixed viewpoint and more like a gentle collaboration between the world and your awareness. A blending, a co-creation. Experience emerges from this meeting point. Neither side is complete on its own. Without the world, there would be no sensory input. Without the mind, there would be no interpretation. Together, they form a fluid field of reality, changing with every breath, every emotion, every subtle shift of attention. The softness of this understanding deepens as you sense how many realities are unfolding around you, each shaped by a unique constellation of inner patterns. Not illusions, not misunderstandings, simply different constructions of the same infinite field of possibility. Perception becomes a quiet testament to the creativity of consciousness. The universe offers raw potential, and the mind turns it into experience. That experience becomes memory. Memory becomes expectation. Expectation becomes perception. And the cycle continues in a slow, rhythmic unfolding that shapes the world you call your own, moment after moment, without ever needing to announce its work. The more closely you look at perception, the more it begins to resemble a kind of internal ecosystem, constantly shifting as conditions inside and outside the mind change. It is not a static mechanism, but a living process, influenced by attention, emotion, physiology, memory, and all the subtle rhythms that move beneath awareness. Even the act of noticing alters the construction. When attention settles on something, the brain devotes more energy to interpreting it, sharpening the details, amplifying the signals, and integrating them more tightly into the internal model of reality. When attention drifts away, the brain lets details fade into the background, smoothing them into a blur of familiar expectation. This is why moments of focus feel rich and dimensional, while moments of distraction pass like soft impressions with little texture. The act of perceiving is not uniform. It shifts with every passing second, shaped by where the mind chooses to rest. Attention itself is a kind of sculptor, carving the shape of reality as it moves. Beneath attention lies emotion, which shapes perception even more profoundly. The emotional state of the body alters the predictions the brain makes. A calm mind perceives openness, possibility, softness. An anxious mind perceives uncertainty, sharpness, movement where none exists. Emotion changes the thresholds at which signals are interpreted as safe or unsafe, familiar or strange, important or dismissible. These shifts are subtle but constant. Emotion changes the world long before thought understands why. And because emotions arise from deep biological rhythms, from hormones and heartbeats and quiet interior currents, they color perception at a level beneath conscious choice. Even the sense of self is influenced by these shifts. When emotions are calm, the self feels spacious, less confined, more fluid. When emotions are tense, the self tightens, feels smaller, more sharply defined. The brain interprets the world differently from within these different states, and the world responds by appearing to change. A place that feels comforting when the mind is peaceful can feel overwhelming when the mind is tense. A silence that feels soothing at one moment may feel heavy at another. The world does not change. The interpretive lens shifts. This fluidity is part of the architecture of consciousness. The mind is always adjusting its predictions, its attention, its emotional coloring, rewriting the world in gentle waves that match the rhythms of the body. Even physiology plays a quiet role in shaping perception. When you are tired, the brain reduces its sampling of detail. Edges appear softer. Movement feels slower. The world blurs slightly at the boundaries. When you are alert, the brain sharpens details, increasing its readiness to detect change. Perception accelerates. The world feels clearer and more insistent. Hunger shifts color perception and decision-making. Temperature alters emotional tone. Heart rate influences threat detection. Breath shapes the intensity of internal experience. These physiological rhythms form the backdrop on which the brain builds reality. They do not merely accompany perception, they contribute to it. A change in the body changes the world you perceive, even when the world remains the same. As the mind drifts deeper into this understanding, the idea of a single shared reality begins to feel less rigid and more like a shared canvas on which countless individual interpretations are painted. The canvas is the same, but each person paints their world differently. These paintings are not wrong or right. They are simply expressions of the inner landscape. Each brush stroke arises from a mixture of memory, emotion, pattern recognition, expectation, and physiological state. Sometimes the paintings align closely, sometimes they differ dramatically, and often entire regions of the canvas are interpreted differently without anyone noticing. What one person sees as a sign of indifference, another sees as concentration. What one perceives as warmth, another perceives as formality. What one experiences as silence, another experiences as connection. These differences arise because the brain constructs meaning from incomplete signals, and meaning shapes perception more powerfully than the signals themselves. Meaning is the thread that ties individual perception into the larger story the brain believes. If the meaning changes, the perception changes with it. This is why a single conversation can transform how someone perceives a place or a person. Why a single memory resurfacing can alter how the present moment feels. Why forgiveness, grief, hope, love, or loss can reshape the entire world without a single external change. The world shifts because the internal meaning has shifted. The external landscape remains constant, but the internal landscape transforms, and perception follows. This internal landscape is vast, filled with associations that never fully reach consciousness yet shape every moment. A scent drifting through the air may evoke a memory so faint it cannot be named. A pattern of movement may remind the body of something it felt long ago. A tone in someone's voice may resonate with past experiences, changing the emotional interpretation before thought can intervene. These undercurrents move quietly through the mind, altering perception in ways that feel natural, inevitable, unquestioned. But they are part of the inner construction, part of the personal version of reality that no one else shares in exactly the same way. Beneath these inner currents lies something even more subtle: the brain's desire for continuity. The mind prefers a world that makes sense, one that unfolds in coherent patterns. When events do not align with expectation, the brain either adjusts the model or adjusts the perception. Sometimes it updates its understanding of the world. Other times, it interprets ambiguous signals in ways that protect the continuity of the internal story. This preference for continuity shapes memory most dramatically. Memory is not a stored recording, but a reconstruction, built anew each time it is recalled. The mind fills gaps, smooths transitions, adds meaning where meaning was unclear, and aligns the memory with the current self. As a result, memories drift and shift quietly over time, each recollection subtly reshaping them. The memory feels true because the brain constructs it to feel continuous with the present. The past becomes a story that supports the present identity, and because every identity is unique, every past becomes unique as well. Even when two people share an experience, they carry away different memories, shaped by the meaning they gave the moment, the emotions moving through them, the expectations they brought to it, and the internal models through which they interpreted the world. The more you look at this process, the more it resembles a quiet dance between the universe and the mind. The universe offers patterns, signals, textures, movement, and possibility. The mind takes these offerings and shapes them into experience. The meeting point between the two becomes what you call reality. And this reality shifts not only with time, but with breath, attention, emotion, memory, and the gentle rhythm of your inner world. Within this understanding lies a kind of softness, a loosening of the assumption that perception should align perfectly between individuals. It opens the way for patience and curiosity, because every mind you meet is assembling the world through a different blend of prediction and sensation. No perception is definitive. Each is a viewpoint shaped by countless hidden processes. The realization moves quietly through the mind, settling deeper, and the world begins to feel different in a subtle way. It does not become less real. It becomes more alive, more dynamic, more responsive to the inner state of the observer. Reality is no longer a rigid structure, but something that breathes through you, shaped by every moment of your awareness. As the understanding of perception deepens, something else becomes clear, something subtle that rests at the threshold between the neuroscientific and the personal. The mind is not only constructing the world outside, it is also constructing the one inside. The thoughts that drift through awareness, the emotions that rise and fall, the sense of being someone moving through a world, all of these are shaped by underlying processes that resemble the same predictive patterns used to interpret external reality. The mind predicts itself. It forms expectations about its own tendencies, emotions, behaviors, and beliefs. When a familiar thought arises, the mind treats it not as a spontaneous event, but as confirmation of who it believes you are. If you have repeated a belief about yourself long enough, the mind integrates it into the internal model and begins to use it as a blueprint. This blueprint shapes not only how the mind interprets external experience, but how it interprets internal experience as well. This is why personal identity feels stable, even though it is constantly shifting. The brain maintains continuity by reinforcing predictions about the self, predicting the kinds of thoughts you will have, the emotions you will experience, the way you will react, and the patterns you will follow. When a new emotion emerges, the mind interprets it through the lens of the identity it has built. Even before the emotion is fully felt, the brain attempts to classify it based on past experiences. A quickened heartbeat might be interpreted as fear if the mind expects fear, or excitement if the mind expects excitement. The same physical sensation can become two entirely different experiences depending on the brain's prediction. In this way, the internal world is shaped by the same blend of sensation and expectation that shapes the external world. The mind constructs the self in the same way it constructs the environment. It relies on assumptions, patterns, and memories, weaving them into a cohesive narrative that feels unbroken. This narrative becomes the ground on which perception stands. But like all perception, it is fluid, shifting with every new moment. The self you believe you are today is touched by every thought that rose and faded, every emotion that passed through you, every meaning you assigned to every experience. It is not fixed. It is continuously shaped by the same quiet machinery that interprets the world outside. When this becomes clear, the boundary between inner and outer reality grows softer. The same processes shaping your view of the world are shaping your view of yourself. The brain does not create these categories separately. They blend into one another in loops of prediction and interpretation. What you believe about yourself alters how you perceive the world, and what you perceive in the world alters what you believe about yourself. These loops continue throughout life, deepening with repetition. The mind becomes efficient at noticing what aligns with its expectations and ignoring what does not. If you expect rejection, the mind notices subtle cues that seem to support that prediction. If you expect acceptance, the mind gravitates toward signs of warmth. These interpretations arise instantly and often unconsciously. They shape your reality before thought has time to catch up. In this way, perception becomes a constant negotiation between what the brain has learned and what the present moment offers. When the two align, perception feels stable. When they do not, perception changes, sometimes abruptly, sometimes slowly. Moments of transformation often occur when the predictive model can no longer explain experience. Something shifts, a realization, a loss, a new connection, a moment of beauty that overwhelms expectation. These moments disrupt the internal story and allow the brain to build a new one. Change begins in perception, and perception changes when prediction fails. Beneath all this, beneath the predictions and emotions and narratives, there is a quieter layer of experience, a kind of baseline awareness that simply notices. Before interpretation, before meaning, before the brain assigns familiar patterns to what is happening, there's a moment of raw presence, a direct encounter with sensation. This moment is brief, but it is there. A flicker of unfiltered experience before the mind begins to weave it into the world you know. In that tiny space, the world and the self are not separate. They are simply part of the same field of awareness. The mind quickly overlays its interpretations, but the presence beneath remains. Sometimes it appears during stillness, sometimes during exhaustion, sometimes during awe, when the world feels larger and the mind's predictions feel too small to contain it. In these moments, perception expands. The ordinary feels new. The familiar feels strange. The mind sees without as much filtering, and the constructed version of reality loosens slightly. These moments are brief because the brain's habit of interpretation is powerful, necessary for navigating existence. But the fact that such moments arise at all reveals something. The constructed nature of perception does not eliminate the possibility of direct experience. It simply shapes it. And because each mind shapes it differently, there are countless ways to experience the same moment. This multiplicity becomes even more apparent when considering how memory interacts with perception. Memory is often mistaken for a reliable record, a place where experiences are stored intact and retrieved unchanged. But the brain does not store memories like files. It stores fragments, sensory pieces, emotional tones, bits of meaning, patterns of context. When a memory is recalled, the brain reconstructs it using these fragments, filling in gaps with predictions, assumptions, and the present emotional state. A memory retrieved in sadness becomes coated with sadness. A memory retrieved in calm becomes softened. A memory retrieved in fear becomes sharper, more alarming. The past shifts quietly as the mind moves through it. Because memory shapes the internal model of reality, and because memory is fluid, the model itself is fluid. Perception is built upon this shifting foundation. Reality is experienced through the lens of what the mind remembers, and remembrance changes with each recollection. The world becomes a tapestry woven from threads that move with time. The more deeply you consider this, the more perception begins to look like a kind of continuous dreaming, structured enough to navigate, but fluid enough to change with every breath of emotion, every flicker of attention, every quiet shift inside. Not a dream in the sense of unreality, but a dream in the sense of creativity. The mind participates in the making of the world. It sculpts each moment from a blend of the world's signals and the inner landscape. And this inner landscape is shaped by everything you have seen, felt, believed, feared, and loved. No two landscapes are the same. Each is a unique reflection of the path that shaped the mind. And in this uniqueness lies the essence of why reality differs for everyone. Not as a flaw in perception, but as a natural expression of consciousness interpreting the infinite field of existence through the lens of its own becoming. Perception begins to feel even more intricate as we widen our view, stretching from the microscopic activity of neurons to the vast inner landscapes shaped over a lifetime. The mind functions like an entire ecosystem, with countless forces interacting at once, each influencing the others, each shifting with subtle changes in environment, emotion, or memory. When you consider this ecosystem as a whole, reality becomes less like a fixed picture and more like a living, breathing terrain that changes as you move through it. This terrain is shaped by every experience you've had, from the earliest patterns of comfort and discomfort in childhood to the complex emotional associations that develop silently through the years. Each moment leaves traces, not always as clear memories, but as small adjustments to the predictive machinery of the brain. These traces accumulate, forming the lens through which the world is perceived. The world outside may be stable, but the lens is always shifting. Imagine perception as a vast river flowing across the surface of consciousness. The river is fed by countless streams: sensory input, memories, expectations, emotions, body sensations, cultural patterns, habitual thoughts, personal beliefs. Some streams are small, barely influencing the flow. Others are strong enough to shape its course entirely. Over time, the river carves its own path, deepening certain channels, abandoning others, developing currents that move more easily in some directions than in others. These channels become the familiar patterns of perception. They guide the mind toward certain interpretations without effort. The more often a pattern is reinforced, the more natural it feels, even when it distorts the world. This is why two people can look at the same scene and interpret it in ways that feel incompatible, each feeling certain that their perception is simply the truth. Their rivers have been shaped by different landscapes, different histories, different emotional and cognitive patterns. Beneath the river lies something even deeper, a vast, quiet reservoir of unconscious processing. These are the processes that determine what the river absorbs and what it lets pass by. The unconscious mind filters the overwhelming complexity of the world, allowing only a manageable portion to reach awareness. At any moment, the senses are sending in far more information than consciousness can handle. The unconscious sorts through it all, keeping only what aligns with its current predictions, discarding everything else. This selective filtering is essential for survival, but it also means that perception is always incomplete. You notice what your unconscious mind has already decided matters. You overlook what it has decided does not. This is not a flaw. It is the only way the mind can function. But it means reality is shaped long before you consciously perceive it. When we move deeper still, beyond the unconscious filters, beyond the river of perception, we find the subtle influence of memory networks that operate in the background. These networks store not only events but also emotional tones, contextual patterns, and subtle associations. When you see a person who resembles someone you trusted, the memory network activates warmth before thought recognizes why. When you hear a tone of voice that resembles someone who once frightened you, tension arises before you identify the trigger. The mind reacts first, then explains. This reaction is formed from patterns laid down across years and decades. Memory shapes perception by quietly altering the brain's predictions. A familiar scent can pull the mind instantly into a forgotten moment. A familiar rhythm of footsteps can evoke ease or unease. A familiar arrangement of furniture can trigger a feeling you cannot name. These moments reveal that the mind perceives not only what is present, but what resembles the past. The present becomes infused with echoes of what has come before. This blending of past and present is often unnoticed, yet it influences every interpretation the brain makes. Even the feeling of understanding something is shaped by memory. When the brain's predictions align smoothly with incoming information, there is a sensation of clarity, of familiarity. When predictions fail, there is confusion, uncertainty, or curiosity. It is not the world that feels familiar or unfamiliar. It is the degree to which the brain's model aligns with reality. These internal models become more complex as the brain grows, absorbing not only personal experience, but also cultural expectations. Culture shapes the lens through which perception is formed, teaching the mind which details are important, which patterns are meaningful, which behaviors are expected, which gestures carry weight. Even the concept of self shifts depending on cultural framing. Some cultures emphasize individuality, shaping the mind to perceive the self as separate. Others emphasize interconnectedness, shaping the mind to perceive the self as part of a larger whole. These cultural patterns influence the interpretation of emotions. In some cultures, emotional expression is encouraged, and the mind becomes skilled at reading subtle shifts in facial expression. In others, emotional restraint is valued, and the mind becomes attuned to smaller cues of internal states. These differences sink deeply into the predictive machinery, altering how the brain interprets the same signals. The same smile, the same silence, the same gesture carries different meaning depending on the cultural model woven into the brain. The mind learns not only through personal experience, but through the patterns of the society in which it develops. Yet, even these cultural patterns are not absolute. They blend with personal experiences, forming a unique perceptual fingerprint. This fingerprint shapes not only how you see the world, but how you see yourself within it. And deeper still, beneath culture, beneath memory, beneath unconscious filtering, there is the subtle interplay of physiology. The brain does not interpret the world alone. It relies on continuous feedback from the body. Heart rhythm, breath depth, muscle tension, stomach sensations, hormonal cycles. Each of these influences the predictions the brain makes. The brain interprets bodily sensations as emotions. A racing heart may be interpreted as fear, excitement, anticipation, or exertion, depending on context and expectation. A tight chest may become sadness or anxiety. Warmth in the body may become comfort or connection. The body shapes perception by providing the raw sensations that the brain interprets as emotional meaning. These interpretations then influence the entire construction of reality. A tired body creates a heavier world. A rested body creates a clearer one. A hungry body sharpens certain details and dulls others. A body in pain narrows attention, pulling it inward, altering the scale of the world. A body in ease expands attention outward, allowing perception to widen. Each physiological state creates its own version of reality, not imagined, experienced, real within the mind. When all of these forces combine, memory, attention, emotion, physiology, culture, unconscious filtering, they form the continual construction of perception. Every moment is the result of countless interactions inside the mind, each one shaping the final experience. Nothing is perceived without being altered by the lens of consciousness, and the lens itself changes with every new experience. This means reality is not simply observed, it is created, not out of fantasy, but out of the meeting of two infinite realms, the world outside and the world within. They merge at the surface of awareness, blending into the seamless flow of perception. The longer you observe this blending, the more the rigid notion of a single, shared reality softens. There is a shared physical world, but no shared experiential world. There is only the field of signals outside and the field of interpretation inside. The signals are common, the interpretation is unique. And because every individual carries their own history, physiology, emotional patterns, cultural shaping, and predictive models, every individual lives in a reality that feels undeniably true, yet differs quietly from everyone else's. Not as illusion, but as the natural expression of consciousness constructing the world moment by moment from its own internal landscape. Perception continues to unfold like a vast inner terrain, textured with layers so numerous and interwoven that even the deepest introspection can uncover only a fraction of what shapes awareness. Yet, by following the slow, drifting path of these hidden mechanisms, what once seemed solid begins to feel softer, more fluid, more alive than the mind ever realized. The world outside may appear fixed, but the world inside is always moving, even in stillness. This movement begins with the simple act of sensing, but sensing itself is not simple. It is the most primal doorway between self and world, a doorway through which everything must pass before becoming experience. Touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. These seem like straightforward pathways delivering information into the mind. But the signals they carry are incomplete, ambiguous, fragmented into raw data that has no inherent meaning. Light has no color, only wavelength. Sound has no tone, only vibration. The body has no emotion, only physical states. Meaning is created by the mind, not delivered by the world. As signals enter the brain, they collide with layers of prediction built up over a lifetime. These predictions act like a scaffolding, a structure the mind uses to interpret signals quickly. Without them, perception would be unbearably slow. It would take too long to recognize a face, to identify a sound, to understand a gesture. Predictive scaffolding allows the brain to work ahead of the present moment, guessing what should be there before verifying it with incoming data. This act of guessing is not random. It is shaped by a lifetime of patterns, how the world has behaved, how people have acted, how emotions have felt, how danger has appeared, how safety has felt. These patterns sink into the mind invisibly, forming a silent foundation beneath perception. Every new sensation is compared against this vast library of predictions, and perception emerges from the match between expectation and signal. When the match is close, the mind barely notices. Reality feels smooth, obvious, unquestioned. When the match is far, perception sharpens, attention intensifies, and the mind adjusts its predictions. It is in these mismatches, these moments of surprise or confusion or wonder, that the constructed nature of perception becomes most visible. Consider how the mind interprets faces. From infancy, the brain becomes exquisitely sensitive to human expression. It learns to interpret micro-movements around the eyes, tiny changes in muscle tension, subtle shifts in tone. But this interpretation is deeply influenced by past experience. A particular expression that once signaled danger may forever carry a shadow of tension. A certain smile that once signaled warmth may always evoke ease. These associations operate beneath awareness, shaping perception automatically. Two people can look at the same face and see entirely different emotional worlds within it. There is no universal perception of expression. There is only the brain's interpretation, shaped by its personal history. Similar patterns appear in how the mind perceives space. The sense of distance, scale, and openness is shaped by internal state. In moments of calm, the world seems wider. In moments of fear, the world seems smaller, more compressed. The space itself has not changed. The mind has changed its interpretation of it. Even the sense of color, which feels so stable and objective, is influenced by internal processes. Fatigue can dull color perception. Emotional arousal can intensify it. Certain memories can shift how particular colors feel. A color may evoke warmth for one person and melancholy for another, shaped by a lifetime of association. The mind does not simply see color, it interprets it. This interpretation extends to motion. When attention is scattered, movement seems faster or more sudden. When attention is focused, movement feels smoother. The mind's internal tempo changes the speed of the world. And beneath all of this lies the body's constant stream of internal sensations. The mind interprets these sensations as emotions. A slight tension in the chest may be labeled as worry. A flutter in the stomach may be labeled as excitement. These labels arise from prediction, not certainty. The same bodily state can be interpreted in completely different ways, depending on the brain's expectations. A person accustomed to anxiety may label a racing heart as fear. A person accustomed to thrill may label the same sensation as anticipation. The body does not lie, but the mind interprets. The same is true of memory. Memory does not preserve the past, it reconstructs it. Each recollection is an act of perception, influenced by the present state of the mind. A calm mind recalls gently. An anxious mind recalls sharply. A nostalgic mind colors memories with softness. A grieving mind colors memories with weight. The past shifts with the present, creating a fluid landscape that feels stable only because the brain prefers cohesion. This reconstruction shapes the internal model of the world, which shapes the expectations that guide perception. The cycle is continuous. Perception influences memory. Memory influences expectation. Expectation influences perception. This cycle is not a flaw. It is the mechanism through which the mind makes sense of complexity. Without it, the world would feel chaotic and overwhelming. With it, the mind achieves stability, continuity, meaning. Yet this stability comes at the cost of uniformity between individuals. Because each mind has lived a different life, built different memories, stored different emotional patterns, developed different expectations, each mind constructs reality differently. Two people standing beside one another, hearing the same words, feeling the same breeze, seeing the same horizon, are not living the same moment. Their internal landscapes shape the moment into two distinct worlds. This divergence becomes especially clear in the interpretation of ambiguity. A vague sound at night may be interpreted as threat by one mind and peaceful quiet by another. A subtle pause in conversation may feel like rejection to one person and simple reflection to another. A silence may feel oppressive to one and comforting to another. The brain cannot tolerate ambiguity. It interprets it instantly, and the interpretation depends entirely on the internal model, built from a lifetime of experiences. Even the sense of time is constructed. Time does not flow in the same way for everyone, or even in the same way for the same person on different days. When the mind is burdened, time thickens. When the mind is at ease, time softens. The passage of a minute expands or contracts depending on internal rhythms. These internal rhythms shift constantly: breath, heartbeat, hormonal cycles, neural oscillations. These rhythms influence perception, shaping the speed of the world. A fast internal rhythm compresses the world. A slow internal rhythm expands it. Thus, the experience of time is not external but internal, constructed by the mind's changing tempo. This internal tempo shapes everything: attention, emotion, memory, even identity. When time feels fast, the mind becomes more reactive. When time feels slow, the mind becomes more reflective. These shifts influence how the world appears and how the self appears within the world. Identity itself is built through perception. The mind observes its own thoughts, feelings, and actions, compares them to its predictions about who it is, and constructs a sense of self that feels solid. But this self is an emergent property of perception, not its foundation. The mind perceives itself the way it perceives the world, through prediction and interpretation. A thought is interpreted as part of the self. An emotion is interpreted as belonging to the self. A pattern of action becomes woven into the story of the self. Yet the self shifts continuously, shaped by every new moment of perception. The personality you believe you possess is not fixed. It is a dynamic pattern of interpretation. When these layers are seen together, sensation, prediction, memory, emotion, physiology, identity, the complexity of perception becomes vast. The mind constructs reality from countless interacting forces, each shaped by a personal history unlike any other. Each individual carries an inner universe built from these forces, and these universes walk alongside one another every day, overlapping yet never identical. With this understanding, reality becomes not a single shared experience, but a constellation of experiences, each one formed from the meeting of the outer world and the inner world. No mind perceives the universe exactly as another does. No moment is shared in perfect symmetry. And yet, within this multiplicity, there is something profoundly unifying. Every person is interpreting the world through the same kinds of processes, the same invisible machinery, the same patterns of prediction and meaning-making. It is the differences in content, not the mechanism, that create the endless diversity of realities. Perception continues to unfold like an inner cosmos, vast and layered, shaped by currents that move far beneath conscious awareness. The deeper one goes into understanding it, the more it reveals itself as a dynamic interplay rather than a fixed mirror of the world. The world outside provides the raw material, but it is the mind that shapes, interprets, colors, categorizes, and brings that material into the realm of experience. Without the mind, the world would be silent. Without the world, the mind would have nothing to sculpt. Together, they create what you call reality. Yet this reality exists differently for every person, shaped by millions of subtle forces interacting within the nervous system every moment of life. Even now, as these words reach your awareness, your mind is filtering them through memory, emotion, physiological state, and expectation. Someone else reading the same words would hear a different rhythm, feel a different tone, assign different meanings. Not because the words change, but because perception changes around them. This variability arises from the mind's reliance on internal models, blueprints created from past experience. These models are essential. Without them, every moment would feel new, unfamiliar, disorienting. The mind uses them to predict what is likely to happen, filling in the gaps between incomplete sensory signals. But because each person's history differs, each person's model differs, and thus each person's interpretation of the world is unique. The signals from the senses are only the beginning. They arrive stripped of meaning. Meaning is added by the internal model, shaped by countless past experiences that taught the brain what is safe, what is threatening, what is important, what can be ignored. For someone who grew up in a calm environment, a sudden noise might barely register as significant. For someone whose early years were filled with unpredictability, the same sound might activate a cascade of alertness. The sound is the same. The interpretation is not. This divergence continues with every sensory input. A shadow might evoke curiosity for one mind and fear for another. A smile may feel welcoming to one person and ambiguous to someone whose past taught them to be cautious. A tone of voice might sound warm in one reality and indifferent in another. The outer world remains the same, but the inner world shapes how it appears. Consider how attention frames perception. Attention is like a lens that moves across the landscape of awareness, highlighting certain details while allowing others to fade. When attention narrows, the world becomes focused and sharp, but also limited. When attention widens, the world becomes soft, expansive, but less precise. These shifts happen constantly, guided by the internal model. The mind attends most to what confirms its expectations. If someone expects rejection, they notice rejection. If they expect kindness, they notice warmth. The details they see are shaped by what they expect to see, and perception reinforces those expectations in a continuous loop. This loop extends into emotion. Emotions shape perception by altering the internal conditions of the mind and body. Fear tightens focus, making the world seem sharper, smaller, closer. Joy widens focus, making the world feel open, spacious, luminous. Sadness slows the internal tempo, stretching moments so they feel heavy and long. Anxiety speeds the internal tempo, compressing moments into rapid beats of anticipation. These internal shifts alter the construction of reality in ways so seamless the mind rarely notices it is doing the constructing. The brain integrates emotional signals automatically, altering its predictions and creating a world that fits the internal experience. This creates two parallel processes. The world shapes emotion through sensory input, and emotion shapes the world through interpretation. The mind is continuously balancing between these influences, creating a reality that fits the current state of the inner world. Memory plays an equally powerful role. Memory is not stored as complete stories, but as fragments. Sensory impressions, emotional tones, contextual details. When the mind recalls a memory, it reconstructs it using these fragments, filling gaps with predictions shaped by the present. This reconstruction is influenced by current mood, identity, and context. A memory recalled in sorrow takes on a heavier tone. The same memory recalled in calm feels softened. This means memory is not a record, but a living phenomenon, changing slightly with every recollection. These dynamic memories form the foundation of the mind's predictions, shaping how new experiences are interpreted. A person who has experienced betrayal may perceive ambiguity as danger. A person who has experienced deep trust may perceive the same ambiguity as neutrality. Again, the experience is shaped more by the internal model than by the external event. Culture further shapes perception, often in ways so subtle they are invisible. Every culture teaches its members how to interpret facial expressions, gestures, social dynamics, emotional displays, power structures, and the boundaries between self and others. These teachings sink into perception before conscious thought develops. A gesture considered respectful in one culture may be perceived as distant in another. A tone of voice considered neutral in one setting may be interpreted as rude elsewhere. People learn to read their world through the lens their culture provides, and this lens becomes part of the predictive model. Even language shapes perception, influencing how the mind categorizes experience. Languages with many words for shades of a color allow speakers to perceive distinctions others might overlook. Languages that emphasize spatial orientation create minds that navigate differently than those shaped by languages emphasizing relational context. Every language carries an embedded worldview, and speakers learn to perceive through that worldview. Thus, the inner universe of perception is shaped by forces stretching from the earliest moments of life to the broad patterns of civilization. Yet, deeper still lies the influence of the body. The body does not merely support perception, it actively shapes it. The brain constantly receives signals from the heart, lungs, muscles, and organs, interpreting them as emotional states. These interpretations are not fixed. They depend on context, expectation, and learned associations. A racing heart can feel like fear, exhilaration, anger, exercise, or anticipation, depending on how the mind interprets it. Muscle tension can be labeled as threat or readiness. Warmth can feel like comfort or embarrassment. Each interpretation shapes perception of the world. A body in pain narrows attention, creating a reality that feels sharper, smaller, more intense. A rested body softens perception, allowing details to drift into awareness with ease. Hunger heightens sensitivity, tuning attention to cues of opportunity or reward. Hormonal cycles shift emotional baselines, altering how events feel. The body continuously adjusts the lens through which perception flows. These adjustments can be profound. They influence whether the world feels safe or threatening, inviting or overwhelming. They shape how others appear and how the self appears. Identity itself arises from perception. The sense of self is built through the same predictive mechanisms that build the rest of reality. The brain observes thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, predicts how these patterns will continue, and constructs an internal model of who you are. This model feels stable but shifts constantly with new experiences. A moment of pride alters the internal model. A moment of failure nudges it differently. The mind updates its sense of self just as it updates its sense of the world. This dynamic self-model influences how experiences are interpreted. If the mind predicts that you are capable, it interprets challenges as temporary obstacles. If it predicts that you are inadequate, it interprets the same challenges as confirmation of limitation. Identity shapes perception. Perception shapes identity. The cycle never stops. At every level, from the smallest sensation to the broadest sense of self, perception is constructed. And because every mind has lived a different life, every construction is unique. This is why reality diverges between people. Not because anyone is wrong, but because every perceiver carries a different internal universe. Even in the same environment, two minds may inhabit two entirely different worlds, shaped by different histories, expectations, emotional currents, interpretations, and internal rhythms. And this divergence does not weaken reality, it enriches it. The universe becomes a shifting tapestry of interpretations, each one a reflection of a different inner world meeting the same outer one. Each mind moves through existence like a wandering constellation, shaping and reshaping reality in ways it barely notices, yet feels deeply. The world outside remains vast, complex, and indifferent, but the world inside transforms it into something meaningful, intimate, and alive. The mind's construction of reality grows even more intricate as we follow its pathways further inward, where the architecture of perception merges with the architecture of consciousness itself. At this deeper level, the brain is not merely interpreting the world. It is generating a continuous field of experience, a lived reality that feels stable only because the mind maintains stability through constant prediction and correction. But beneath this stability lies movement, continuous, silent, unending movement. Thoughts drift like quiet currents. Sensations flicker and dissolve. Emotions rise, peak, and fade. Attention shifts, sometimes like a slow turning of the head, sometimes like a sudden jolt of energy. All of these fluctuations shape how the world appears. A single shift in attention can change the emotional meaning of a moment. A single unconscious memory surfacing can change the interpretation of someone's expression. A single flicker of bodily sensation can alter the entire tone of a conversation. Reality is built from this interplay of tiny influences, each one changing the moment subtly or dramatically. Yet awareness tends to experience the final product, not the thousands of micro-adjustments that shape it. Each moment appears whole and complete, as if it arrived fully formed. The mind hides its own construction process because the construction is seamless. This seamlessness is essential. If you had to consciously interpret every sensory detail, every emotional signal, every shift in bodily state, life would become an overwhelming flood of raw information. Instead, the mind simplifies, integrates, compresses, and smooths, producing a continuous stream of experience that feels manageable. This stream is not fixed, but adaptive. When the environment is calm, the mind relaxes its predictions, allowing more sensory detail to enter awareness. When the environment is uncertain, the mind tightens its predictions, filtering out information that does not match expectations, focusing only on what feels most important. This shifting balance between openness and selectivity influences not only perception but also memory formation. Memories formed during heightened emotional states tend to be sharper because the mind pays more attention to details that matter for survival. Memories formed during calm states tend to be softer, more diffuse. These memory patterns shape the internal model of the world, creating expectations that guide future perception. If the mind has stored many memories of safety, it predicts safety, creating a reality that feels open and expansive. If it has stored many memories of danger, it predicts a threat, creating a reality that feels constricted and alert. These patterns do not stay fixed. They shift over time as new experiences modify the internal model. But because the model was built from countless moments, it does not change easily. It bends slowly, adjusting its predictions in small increments unless a powerful experience disrupts the entire structure. Such disruptions can be moments of trauma or moments of revelation, each capable of altering how the mind perceives the world. When the internal model is destabilized, perception becomes raw, unfiltered. The world appears sharper, more intense, as if the mind is recalibrating itself. Over time, it forms new predictions based on the new pattern. This fluid recalibration is part of what makes perception so resilient. The mind can absorb change, adapt to new environments, relearn how to interpret signals. This ability ensures survival, but it also ensures individuality. No two minds adapt in exactly the same way, because no two minds have the same memories, the same emotional histories, the same physiological reactions. Even siblings raised in the same home construct different models, shaped by small differences in personality, attention, context, and emotional sensitivity. These differences expand over time, creating diverging realities that feel equally true to each person. Beneath these individual differences lies a shared biological foundation. The human brain uses the same general mechanisms across individuals: predictive processing, sensory integration, emotional tagging, memory reconstruction, and bodily feedback. These mechanisms form the universal structure of perception. But the content, the memories, meanings, associations, emotional tones, is unique to each mind. It is as if all humans are using the same kind of canvas and the same kind of paint. But each person is painting a different landscape, shaped by a lifetime of subtle influences. And this landscape is not static. It changes with physiological state. Hunger, fatigue, hormonal shifts, pain, and temperature all influence perception. When the body is cold, the world feels sharper, more distant. When the body is warm, the world feels softer, more intimate. When the heart rate increases, the mind interprets the world with heightened intensity. When breath slows, the mind becomes more spacious. These bodily rhythms shape the mind's expectations, which then shape what the mind perceives. This interplay between body and mind forms the core of emotional experience. Emotions arise not from external events alone, but from how the mind interprets bodily sensations. A trembling sensation might be labeled as fear in one context, anticipation in another, coldness in another. The label shapes the perception of the moment, and the label itself is shaped by the internal model the mind has built over time. As perception flows through these layers, body, memory, attention, prediction, it arrives at the level of awareness. Awareness is not a passive observer. It is woven into the entire process. It feels as though awareness is looking at the world, but in truth, awareness is looking at a world constructed inside the mind. This constructed world is not imaginary. It is the lived reality of consciousness, the only reality any individual can access. The brain has no direct contact with the external world. It has only signals. Awareness experiences a world built from those signals, filtered through the lens of prediction and interpretation. The result feels seamless because the brain's construction is instantaneous. Even the sense of continuity in time is constructed. The mind stitches together moments that would otherwise feel disjointed. It fills the gaps between snapshots of perception, creating the illusion of flow. Without this stitching, the world would appear as a series of disconnected fragments. With it, reality becomes a continuous unfolding, one moment blending softly into the next. This stitching becomes apparent only when it falters. During states of extreme fatigue or shock or surprise, moments can feel disjointed, as if time has slipped. These moments reveal the underlying mechanism that usually remains hidden. The same mechanism constructs the sense of self. Awareness experiences the self as unified, consistent, and enduring. But beneath that unity lies a shifting collection of memories, beliefs, patterns, and sensations, all woven together by the brain into a coherent narrative. The self is not a fixed entity, but a continuous reconstruction. Every moment updates the model slightly, based on what the mind perceives, feels, and remembers. Because the self is constructed through the same predictive machinery that constructs the world, the two influence each other. The internal model of self shapes how the world is perceived, and the world shapes how the self is updated. If the mind believes the self is capable, it perceives challenges differently than if it believes the self is helpless. If the mind perceives the world as threatening, it shapes the self into someone who must be cautious. If the mind perceives the world as safe, it shapes the self into someone who can explore. The inner and outer realities form a reciprocal loop, each continuously reshaping the other. Within this loop lies the essence of why reality is different for every person. Each mind has lived a different life. Each mind carries a different history of joy, loss, curiosity, fear, connection, longing, and resilience. Each mind has adapted to its circumstances in its own way. Each mind has developed its own patterns of prediction, its own emotional thresholds, its own perceptual biases. These differences are invisible from the outside, but shape the reality each individual inhabits. A street may feel comforting to one person and dangerous to another. A silence may feel peaceful to one and heavy to another. A face may look trustworthy to one and unreadable to another. The world outside does not change. The world inside interprets, and the interpretation is shaped by everything the mind has ever experienced. Even imagination plays a role. Imagination is the mind's ability to simulate possibilities, to construct realities that do not yet exist. But the same mechanisms used for imagining are used for perceiving. The brain does not sharply distinguish between simulation and experience. It uses similar patterns for both. When someone imagines danger, their body responds as if danger might actually be present. When someone imagines connection, their mind responds with openness. These imagined scenarios shape predictions, which then shape perception. The boundary between imagination and perception is more porous than it seems. The mind rehearses reality before it perceives it. Every prediction is a kind of imagination, a simulation of what the world might be. Perception is the meeting of that simulation with actual sensory input. This meeting is not always perfect. When prediction dominates, imagination shapes the moment more than sensation. When sensation dominates, the world feels new and vivid. These shifts create moments of clarity, moments of distortion, moments of insight, moments of misunderstanding. Within all this complexity lies a gentle truth. Reality is not a single shared experience, but a tapestry woven from billions of internal universes, each shaped by a lifetime of learning, sensing, and predicting. Each universe is real to the mind that perceives it. Each universe is constructed from the same basic mechanisms, yet each one is entirely unique. As perception continues to reveal itself not as a fixed mirror, but as a living process, the mind begins to resemble a vast internal observatory, always receiving signals, always generating predictions, always revising its internal map of the world. In this observatory, consciousness is not a watcher seated in a single location. It is more like an atmosphere, a gentle field that spreads through the entire system, shaped by every subtle shift in attention, emotion, memory, and bodily state. Even the slightest internal change alters how this atmosphere absorbs the world. The rise of a quiet emotion can tilt perception. A single remembered phrase can soften or harden a moment. A small change in breathing can shift the sense of time, making seconds seem elongated or compressed. These shifts often go unnoticed, yet they influence the entire construction of experience. The mind's internal world is rarely still. It moves with the fluidity of a deep ocean current, carrying sensations, associations, and thoughts from one place to another without announcing its motion. A person may walk into a familiar room and feel, without knowing why, that something has changed. They may interpret a silence differently than usual. They may feel a subtle pull toward or away from something. These feelings arise from the quiet interplay of countless internal processes, each contributing to the final shape of the moment. This interplay extends into the smallest details. A faint sound in the distance might barely be noticed by one mind while capturing the full attention of another. A face glimpsed for only a moment might carry an impression that shapes the entire day for one person while leaving no trace for someone else. The mind chooses what to keep and what to ignore based on the predictive patterns built from a lifetime of experience. These patterns operate like gravitational fields, attracting some signals and repelling others, shaping the flow of awareness. The gravitational pull of past experience can be gentle or strong. A childhood filled with unpredictability may create a mind that constantly scans for threat. A childhood filled with stability may create a mind that relaxes more easily. These differences persist into adulthood, shaping how individuals interpret the same situations. The mind is never truly empty. Every perception is filtered through layers of expectation, and expectation is shaped by memory. But memory is not static. It shifts like sand, rearranged each time it is touched. When a memory is recalled, it does not return untouched. It is rebuilt, influenced by the emotional tone of the moment, by the meanings the mind has constructed since the original event, by the identity the mind has embraced. A memory of embarrassment recalled years later may feel less sharp if the self has grown more confident. A memory of triumph may feel softer if the present moment carries doubt. The past is never fixed because the mind reconstructs it through the lens of the present. This reconstruction shapes how the mind builds its internal model of the world. This model influences how new experiences are interpreted. The cycle continues endlessly, a continuous loop of perception, memory, emotion, prediction, and reinterpretation. Because the loop is always in motion, reality is always in motion. Even when the external environment remains unchanged, the internal experience of it shifts as the mind shifts. A quiet morning can feel peaceful one day and restless the next. The same landscape can feel expansive in one moment and confining in another. The world is constant, yet the reality experienced is not. Beneath these fluctuations lies the body, providing a steady stream of signals that shape the mind's interpretation of the world. The mind does not simply observe the body. It uses the body's signals as raw material for perception. A quickening heartbeat might create the sense that the world is speeding up. Slow, deep breaths might make the world feel wider. The state of the stomach can alter the interpretation of a passing comment. Tension in the shoulders can color the meaning of a brief silence. These bodily influences are not secondary. They form the foundation upon which perception is built. A body that is tired produces a mind that views the world through softened edges. A body that is energetic sharpens the contours of reality. A body that is ill narrows attention, making the world feel closer, heavier, more urgent. A body at ease allows attention to expand, creating a sense of openness. Even temperature changes influence emotional tone. The body is not merely a vessel, it is a co-creator of experience. Its signals shape the emotional palette from which the mind draws meaning. These signals do not remain isolated. They blend with the mind's predictions, creating a feedback loop in which body and mind continuously adjust one another. The mind interprets bodily signals, and these interpretations influence bodily state, which influences the next interpretation. A single moment of nervousness may create a chain of physical sensations that the mind then labels, reinforcing the emotion. A single moment of calm can soften the entire internal environment, shifting the interpretation of incoming signals. This delicate interplay forms the core of emotional experience. Emotions themselves are not merely reactions to the world, they are interpretations. They arise from the mind's attempt to make sense of bodily states, memories, and predictions. Two people may experience the same bodily sensation, a flutter in the chest, and interpret it entirely differently. One may label it anxiety, another may label it excitement. The same sensation becomes two different realities. These labels shape how the moment unfolds. The person who interprets excitement may lean forward into opportunity. The person who interprets anxiety may retreat. The label becomes part of perception. The label becomes part of identity. Identity evolves as the mind constructs and reconstructs the sense of who is perceiving. The self is not a monolithic presence, but a fluid collection of habits, memories, preferences, and emotional patterns. These patterns shift with time. A mind that once saw itself as timid may later see itself as bold, not because the external world changed, but because the internal narrative did. The self changes as perception changes, and perception changes as the self changes. The boundary between inner and outer becomes less distinct as the mind's predictive machinery reveals itself. What is perceived outside is shaped by what is held inside, and what is held inside is shaped by what is perceived outside. The world becomes a mirror, reflecting not just external forms, but the internal architecture of the mind. When a person feels joy, the world may seem brighter. When a person feels sorrow, the world may seem dimmer. The external world does not change in hue, yet the internal atmosphere transforms it. These atmospheric shifts become the quiet companions of daily life. They shape how long a moment feels, how near or distant others appear, how heavy or light a silence seems. Even time itself bends around the mind's internal rhythms. In moments of fear, time stretches. In moments of pleasure, time contracts. In moments of deep focus, time disappears. These distortions occur not in the world, but in the mind's interpretation of sensory and emotional flow. When attention settles fully on a task, the mind stops tracking the passage of time, focusing instead on the incoming signals. The world narrows, becoming more vivid. When attention drifts, the world expands, becoming softer. Time is not a fixed experience. It is a construction woven into perception. And, like all constructs of perception, it varies from person to person. For someone living through a turbulent period, days may feel elongated, each moment heavy with emotional significance. For someone living in a period of ease, days may pass gently, the hours blending into one another. These differences are not imagined. They are genuine variations in how the mind constructs reality. And because time shapes every moment of experience, these differences influence how the world feels. A slow world feels deeper. A fast world feels urgent. A still world feels expansive. A chaotic world feels fragmented. All of these qualities arise from the interplay of attention, memory, emotion, and bodily state. The physical world remains steady. The constructed reality shifts. Even the sense of presence, of being here, now, shifts with perception. When the mind is pulled into memory, the world fades. When the mind is absorbed in anticipation, the present feels distant. When the mind is fully present, the world sharpens, becoming luminous with detail. Presence is not a fixed position of awareness. It is a dynamic state influenced by emotional tone, bodily rhythms, and cognitive patterns. A mind filled with worry struggles to remain present because its predictive machinery is constantly jumping ahead. A mind filled with regret struggles to remain present because it is reconstructing past moments in an attempt to understand them. A mind at ease rests more comfortably in the present because its predictions are calm, its physiology is stable, and its emotional currents flow gently. These states shift throughout the day. No mind remains the same from one moment to the next. The fluidity of perception creates a fluidity of being. And yet, despite this fluidity, perception feels solid, as if the world is stable and the self is unchanging. This illusion of stability is not a flaw, but a necessity. It allows the mind to navigate life without becoming overwhelmed by the constant motion beneath the surface. But when one looks closely, when one follows the subtle movement of perception through its layers, the illusion softens, revealing a more expansive truth. Experience is a process, not a thing. The world you encounter is not the world as it is, but the world as your mind constructs it. And because every mind constructs differently, every reality is unique. Perception, in all its layered complexity, reveals itself as something far more fluid than the mind first assumes. It is not the passive receiving of a world already formed, but the active shaping of a world in constant motion. Every moment is sculpted from the meeting of countless influences, each one subtle, each one essential. As the mind moves through its own inner landscape, the outer world shifts with it, not because the world itself is changing, but because the interpretation changes. Interpretation is the bridge between sensation and meaning, the silent translator that stands between the raw signals arriving from the senses and the finished reality that appears in awareness. Most of the time, this translator works invisibly. You do not notice the thousands of adjustments it makes to align the world with your expectations. You do not notice how it fills in missing details, how it softens irregularities, how it amplifies what matters most to your internal model. You simply experience the result. The result feels complete, unified, effortless. Yet beneath that effortlessness lies a vast system of prediction and filtering, memory and emotion, bodily sensation and cultural shaping. The system functions like a living organism, adapting itself to new conditions, integrating new information, rebalancing itself constantly. Even when the external environment stays the same, the internal environment never does. The mind is always learning, always refining, always adjusting its understanding of the world. This ongoing adaptation is why perception feels stable despite the constant internal movement. The brain maintains a balance between change and continuity, between novelty and familiarity. It anchors a perception in what it expects while allowing enough flexibility to update when necessary. But because each mind has its own anchor points, its own past experiences, its own emotional history, its own patterns of attention and memory, the stability each person feels arises from a different configuration. For one person, stability comes from predicting connection. For another, stability comes from predicting solitude. For one, the world feels safe unless proven otherwise. For another, it feels uncertain until proven safe. These differences shape how the world appears. They influence what is noticed and what is ignored, what feels inviting and what feels dangerous, what seems possible and what seems impossible. Even the simplest actions are shaped by these internal predictions. When you reach for an object, your brain predicts its weight, its texture, its temperature. When the prediction matches reality, the movement feels natural. When it does not, the world feels momentarily strange. These brief moments of mismatch reveal the mind's dependence on its internal model. They show that perception is not a direct encounter with the world, but a constant negotiation. The mind predicts, the world responds, the mind adjusts. This negotiation extends into emotion. When you feel sadness, the world seems muted because the mind is predicting mutedness. When you feel joy, the world brightens because the mind is predicting brightness. When you feel fear, the world narrows because the mind is predicting threat. These predictions influence attention, which influences what the mind perceives, which reinforces the emotion that began the cycle. Emotion does not merely color perception, it helps create it. The mind looks for what it expects to find, and because every mind expects different things based on its past, every mind finds a different reality. Yet, even with these deep individual differences, the mind seeks a connection. It tries to match its model of the world with the models held by others. Communication is not the exchange of objective reality. It is the attempt to align two subjective worlds. Sometimes the alignment is easy. Two people share enough history, enough emotional resonance, enough similarity in how their minds predict and interpret. Their realities feel close enough to overlap. Understanding flows naturally, but often alignment is harder. Small differences in perception accumulate. A tone of voice is interpreted differently. A gesture carries a different weight. A silence feels meaningful to one and empty to another. These disparities arise because each person's inner universe has been shaped by experiences no one else has lived. No two minds have walked the exact same path, and so no two minds perceive the same moment in exactly the same way. Even shared experiences branch into countless individual ones. A group of people standing together looking at the same sunset are not seeing the same sunset. One sees the warmth of memory. Another sees the quiet beauty of light. Another sees a reminder of loss. Another sees only the changing temperature of the air. The sky does not change, yet each mind experiences its own version of it. The world becomes a canvas, and perception becomes the brush that paints it. The strokes are shaped by everything within, the rhythms of breath, the patterns of thought, the echoes of memory, the shadows of fear, the sparks of hope, the softness of longing, the weight of past experience. Each person paints a different picture because each person carries a different palette. And yet, beneath all these differences, there's a profound unity. Every mind is constructing. Every mind is interpreting. Every mind is creating meaning from fragments. The mechanism is the same in all people. The variation lies in the content. This unity means that while no two realities are the same, all realities emerge from the same principles. The world outside provides the raw sensory field. The world inside provides the interpretation. Where the two meet, a personal reality forms. And this personal reality is the only one any mind can truly inhabit. When this is understood, the differences between people become less surprising. The friction between perspectives becomes less personal. The misunderstanding becomes less about error and more about variation. Each person is navigating reality with the tools their mind has built from everything it has survived, loved, feared, learned, and remembered. each person perceives through the lens carved by their experiences. And so reality is not a single shared structure, but a vast collection of intersecting worlds, each one shaped by the consciousness that inhabits it. These worlds overlap, touch, diverge, reconnect. They form the intricate human tapestry through which all relationships move. Every conversation is a crossing of realities. Every moment of empathy is a brief alignment. Every conflict is a collision of differing predictions. Every moment of recognition, when two minds suddenly see from the same angle, feels profound because it is rare. It is the moment when two internal universes briefly synchronize, when two sets of predictions converge enough for understanding to arise effortlessly. These moments remind the mind that while reality differs for everyone, the capacity to connect across these differences is universal. In the end, perception is not about discovering a single objective world, but about navigating the world your mind constructs while remaining open to the worlds constructed by others. It is the dance between inner and outer, between the field of possibility outside and the field of interpretation inside. It is the quiet merging of sensation and meaning, prediction and presence, memory and imagination. And throughout this gentle, unending process, reality becomes not a fixed entity, but a living flow, shaped moment by the infinite nuances of consciousness.